This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Isotope, Atom Audio, Lewitt, and Spectra 1964. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX110D mic pre and C610 comp limiter with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
You can buy plexiglass. So buy like the thickest plexiglass you can get, like maybe 1 inch thick, the most you can afford. It's still somewhat expensive. And then you can get baby bumpers, which are like for the sides of cribs, and that'll fit around the plexiglass. And then you can slide the plexiglass in with the baby bumper around the side of it. And this is like super DIY way of trying to add some soundproofing to your window.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs. Whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Wilson Harwood, a producer and mix engineer in Nashville, Tennessee. He founded his company Soundproof Your Studio in 2020 after building a soundproof studio in his backyard. He knew that the world needed better explanations of how to soundproof a recording studio, so he set out to teach soundproofing through his YouTube channel, podcast, blog, and courses. Wilson's goal with Soundproof Your Studio is to provide scientifically backed approaches to soundproofing that are easy and practical to implement. He now helps thousands of people from all over the world with their own DIY soundproofing projects, whether it's a shed out back, a basement in a house, or a spare garage. Essentially, Rockstars, he's a great resource for figuring out how to soundproof your own home studio. I received an email from Wilson that was pretty cool, so I'm going to share just a little bit about it. He wrote to me a little while back. He said, "Hey, Lidge, Wilson here from Elevated Music Recording Studio in East Nashville and the founder of SoundproofYourStudio.com. We've met a few times, but most notably was when I spoke out during the city council meeting on the home studio ban. I wanted to reach out because I'd love to share my knowledge of soundproofing with your podcast listeners. I'm a big fan of the show and feel that just how creatives can record, mix, and master at home, they can also build their own professional soundproof studios. So I'm super excited to have Wilson here on the show. Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Rockstars, I am actually sitting here in Wilson's studio. We've set up and it's nice and soundproofed unless, I drop my water glass from the middle of an interview or scribble too loud with my pencil. But please welcome Wilson Harwood to Recording Studio Rockstars. Wilson, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here, man. Thanks for your patience while I set up. Your studio is beautiful and ready to go. It took me about 30 minutes to set up my podcast.
It's all good. Well, we were chatting a lot too. I was distracting you.
Hey, man, it's hard. It's hard to beat the like instant efficiency of doing those Zoom interviews, but it's a lot of fun to just get out and about and see people in person and see this beautiful studio that you've built, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words, like, give us the brief arc to how you got interested in all this stuff. And now, here you are in East Nashville. I think you're married and settled in and making records. And,
totally.
You started this incredible soundproofyourstudio.com.
Yeah. So it's a long story, as I'm sure it is with a lot of your guests. But basically, in a nutshell, moved to Nashville in 2016 and was an artist predominantly. And I had played in bands. And had always loved home recording.
I'm guessing guitar. I'm sitting next to a rack of guitars.
A rack, and there's even more at my other house. But that's a small collection.
Good-looking guitars too.
Yeah, and banjo too.
Oh, your bass says Carlo, but my reading glasses were still on, so I thought it said Casio.
Oh, that would be awesome.
I actually played a Casio guitar when I was in a blues band in Hong Kong. So
cool. Yeah, I mean, the Carlo Robelli is not far from a Casio bass. What it would be. This is like a pretty cheap but awesome bass. But yeah, no, I started out and a bedroom here in East Nashville in a rental, like many wannabe producers, and slowly tried to get clients and was working and co-writing here in Nashville. And that led to another bedroom home studio in my second rental house. And then finally, I was fortunate enough in 2019 to buy this house and knew from the very beginning that I wanted to build a studio in the backyard.
It's almost 20 years to the day, my story.
Really?
Yeah, because I was doing the same thing coming out of school. I didn't move here as an artist. I mean, I guess I did because I'm always an artist, but...
Yeah, we're all artists at heart, right?
Yeah. I mean, I moved here for the school thing and to immediately go into studio work. But the experience of living in different apartments and, trying to find a corner of the apartment or a part of a room or an extra room and set up some sort of studio thing and then accumulate some things and then finally buy a house.
Yeah.
And with the vision, I was like, that's my 5-year vision. It's like
totally.
One day I want to have like a real home studio,
Yeah.
And we were inventing it kind of then too.
Totally. And I mean, we still are, right? Yeah. Like I didn't know anyone who had built a soundproof studio. I mean, yours I think is, and maybe a lot of studios in here, but the only people I had to go off of were other bedroom producers. And one of my friends who had built a drum studio here in Donaldson, which is in Nashville. And he had built it out of a shed, like a prefab shed, but it wasn't really soundproofed. It was just a space to play drums in. So I went down this crazy journey of reading one book called Home Recording Studio, Build It Like the Pros. And from there, found a contractor and was like, all right, let's do this. I don't know what I'm doing fully yet, but like, I'm going to build the studio. And during that process, I was like, I should teach other people how to do this. Like, this is something that would be really useful for other people to learn how to do.
Now, in all fairness, did you have teaching experience already? Are you like a guitar player who has taught guitar before? Or did you just get the message that like, it's cool to teach these days?
I think I've always been a teacher at heart. I taught music lessons for 10 years in Colorado.
There you go.
And so I was teaching for a living right as I got out of music, even in music school, I was already teaching classes at the University of Colorado. So teaching to me was very natural, and also thinking about things in a way that I could explain them to somebody. Because as you know, from teaching, it's like, okay, it's one thing to just tell people how to do stuff, but how do you really teach it in a way that simplifies it? And that's really what I noticed when I was looking at building a soundproof studios. I was like, this is really bad teaching. Not bad teaching, but it's really complex.
That you were reading, you mean?
It's not bad. I don't want to hate on Rod because he's helped out a lot, but like it was really complex, written for like engineers,
right,
and people who have lots of experience with construction.
Do math and stuff like that.
Yeah, he even tried to stay away from the math, but it still came out as this very engineer's mind type of way of teaching. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to explain this stuff and make it kind of fun.
I agree, man. I mean, I'm fascinated by the science, the physics behind it all and trying to understand it. and I enjoyed trying to grasp the calculations in science a little bit. But in the end, you're faced with these really mundane decisions. Like it's just a trip to Home Depot and like, okay,
Totally.
do I get one of these or one of these? And like, how much, or how many panels do I put on my wall? And it's like all the science in the world doesn't really answer those questions. It's just sort of practical, common sense solutions I found.
Yeah, it's true. And like having a practical sort of step-by-step guide was my goal of like, okay, I can distill this down into let's eliminate half the stuff out there that's confusing and just try to teach you what's really important so that you can ultimately, like we all want to do, play music and make music.
Yeah.
Like the soundproofing is not the end goal. It's like this is a stepping stone towards what we all really want to do.
Right. Totally. I mean, I'll be honest, even this podcast isn't the end goal for me. I mean, this is like, this is just a fun opportunity to talk about the shit that I love talking about anyway, because I just want to make records with friends,
Yeah.
Okay. So in your experience of those rental, studio settings, what did you discover? Like, what were some of the things that made, you look at it and you're like, okay, this is what it means to have a rental apartment style studio. These are the things that I might record there. These are the things I might do in mixing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first thing, I should go back even before. So before I moved to Nashville, I was in Colorado, in Boulder, for 10 years and playing in bands. And even at that time when I was teaching music lessons, I had blocked off half of my bedroom that I was renting in like a house with 5 of my best bandmates, that type of deal right out of college. And I had created a little home studio there, and I didn't know anything. Bedroom studio. Like this was the ultimate bedroom. I didn't know anything about acoustics. I bought, some basic monitors and the Focusrite little 2-channel thing that everyone gets, the Scarlett, and I just started messing around. And that was the beginning. But then moving to Nashville, I finally had a room. My girlfriend at the time was so nice to allow us to buy or rent a house, and then I get a whole room in the house for the studio, which was pretty awesome.
But I mean, that's a great point. I mean, most of us start out with the studio as like, what's that? The desk in our bedroom, whatever, bedroom studio. It's funny thinking about the concept of when they say when you're going to start something like a podcast, you should pick a topic and then niche down and then niche down even further and niche down even further than that till it hurts,
Right.
So like, we think a home studio is sort of niching down, but it's like, but what about the bedroom studio podcast?
Right.
So Rockstars, if you want to start something really unique that nobody's done, start the bathroom studio.
The bathroom studio. That's going to be a tough one.
You'll blow up. No competition.
Yeah, definitely. So, when I moved to Nashville, I finally, having your own room, and I'm sure a lot of you listening can relate to this, is that you have the ability to dedicate that space for the acoustic treatment. And I had watched a few YouTube videos at that point and taken some courses on lynda.com, I think, which were great. And I learned about acoustic treatment, and that's what got me into getting the room to sound good for the first time.
Right. So that rental place where you finally had your own dedicated room, you're like, okay, how am I going to make this right? Yeah.
How am I going to get like my speakers set up correctly, 38% rule, listening position, put bass traps in the corners, create the reflection-free zone. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are all sort of the basics of a rectangular room, how you can make it sound good. And that's where it started. But I didn't have a soundproof studio at this point. I mean, if someone was playing music in the other room in the house, it would ruin a take. Or if a lawnmower was mowing the lawn, or even if birds were chirping, you could hear that.
Yeah.
So I started to learn that.
Yeah,
me too. Yeah. And the one I really remember is one rental where they were doing construction and the trucks kept backing up, and that loud beeping noise was like cutting through my window.
Oh man.
And we had to stop recording until they stopped.
RX
it was. I didn't even think even it was around yet, or I didn't know about it. I was like, this is terrible. So I think that led me to the idea of soundproofing. I was like, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to build something from the ground up, I want to do it right. Yeah. And then the other thing was having clients. For those of you who are trying to build an actual business around production, the way it feels, the way it looks, keeping it looking professional is really important. And I think I wanted that for the clients, for the level of work we were trying to accomplish in the studio. And then it just got a little out of hand, and I like obsessed over soundproofing, and now I'm teaching it to other people. So that's like the story in a nutshell.
That's funny. Remembering that whole like bird chirping thing, I'm reminded of a story that a previous guest, Roger Moutino, who I just had lunch with last week, said to me once. He was talking about in Hollis' experience with studios and like things that bleed in. He said, the one thing is the train. When a train comes in, like, trains can be so loud and they never mess up a record. And I was thinking, and somehow just like the whole concept of train and music and songwriting, I guess it was all just like this copacetic thing.
It is super
somehow
interesting.
He felt like a train sound never seems to ruin
it. Always
record.
Just sort of
it
fits
just blends
in.
right in. It's too,
like
too harmonic, maybe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Especially here in Nashville, where we have so many of them crisscrossing through East Nashville. It's like every studio has a train.
Yeah. Unlike birds, where birds, if you slow a bird chirp down, you're like, oh my God, that's an incredible melody. Mm-hmm. Birds, probably one chirp ruining your vocal take is if you slow it down, you discover it's a better hit song than the one you're working on.
Right, yeah, exactly. Like we should listen to the birds more carefully.
All right, so you're in your studio, and again, like you point out, the things you think about a speaker placement, and like, really what you're talking about is setting up your listening work environment, your ability to listen to what you're doing in a way that sounds great, that's fun, that works, and that hopefully allows you to create music and mix so that when you take it somewhere else and listen, it also sounds great, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of leads to this big thing that I teach a lot on my YouTube channel, which is the difference between soundproofing and acoustic treatment.
Yes.
Right. Which some of you may know exactly what we're talking about. And you're like, oh yeah. And Liz for sure knows this, but a lot of people come to me saying, oh, they want a soundproof. And first thing they mention is foam. Like, what foam panels can I put up to soundproof my room? Yeah. And I always have to say, okay, that's not soundproofing, that's acoustic treatment. So acoustic treatment is using panels that absorb sound to reduce reflections, to make it sound better. Like, that's the easiest way I could describe it, is like, it's just makes your room sound better. And then soundproofing is construction of your walls, your floors, your ceiling to actually keep sound in the studio from going out and sound on the outside of your studio from coming in. And that's it.
Yeah, I'll rephrase that too. So soundproofing is keeping the sound in and keeping the sound out. Mm-hmm. Acoustic treatment is making sure that the sound that it is in sounds good while you're in it, right?
Yeah, and you need to do both.
Right.
I wouldn't want you to build a soundproof studio with no acoustic treatment. If we were in this room without acoustic treatment, it would sound like a church.
Right, exactly, yeah.
It was scary when I finished it.
Go into any office space. Just pick the room in your house that's an office and walk in there.
Yeah.
It probably sounds boxy and boomy, unless you got nice stuff hanging on the walls.
Totally, yeah. You got to have like rugs and nice things.
So that's a really important thing. And you're right, that always comes up. People are like, I need to soundproof the blah, blah, blah. Should I just get some panels and stuff? Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more. There is crossover between those two things, which we can talk about, but sound panels is all about sound treatment in the space.
Yeah.
And people need to decide that first. It's like, what's the issue that you're trying to solve? Are you trying to solve making sure that your speakers play back and sound really good to you while you're sitting in the mix position? Mm-hmm. Or are you trying to solve that when you play your acoustic guitar and sing, it doesn't sound, you don't hear like this boxy sound of the kitchen kind of thing on your recording? So that's all sound treatment, right?
That's all sound treatment, exactly. And if you were going to order them, I would say sound treatment is more important than soundproofing.
It's a hell of a lot easier to solve.
It's an easier thing to solve. It still can be somewhat costly.
Yeah.
But relatively speaking, it's going to be a lot easier. It's going to be a lot less expensive. So I do teach that as well in what I'm doing, but it's like the soundproofing and the acoustic treatment are these two situations. And the way I teach it is always, all right, we're going to build your soundproof studio first, and then we'll put the acoustic treatment up, so
yeah.
That's kind of the way to think of it.
Yeah, soundproofing is if you're concerned that your neighbors are going to ruin all your recordings, or that you're your recordings are going to ruin your neighbors.
Yeah, that might be more likely what
That's
might
a different
happen.
thing. And now, it's probably fair to say that if you're renting a place, there's not much you can do about your soundproofing, and maybe you'll correct me on that. But there's plenty you can do about your sound treatment. And then if you own the place, there's plenty you can do about soundproofing. But just depending on the situation or the studio environment, it's going to be easy or hard, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I usually, with my students, I usually ask them like, hey, are you renting? Because if you're renting, unless you really want to invest in the rental and your landlord wants you to do this, which I can't imagine too many wanting that unless you're in Nashville or LA, you're investing tens of thousands of dollars likely into something you don't own. So it's not a very good idea. And if you own a property, I think it's a great idea because, again, in a town like Nashville, the resale value of your home will not be affected by having a studio. In fact, it might even be more likely to sell at a higher price. So when you invest in your property, this is going to increase the resale value of your home. And if you do it right, it's even better. And it kind of like this dovetails into maybe another good question that you might ask, which is like, what's the best soundproof floor? And the best soundproof floor is a concrete slab. And so if you have like a basement with a concrete slab already there, you're light years ahead of most people. If you have a garage with a concrete slab, it's a great place to start just because concrete slabs are so expensive to build.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Mine was a garage, the concrete
awesome.
slab.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And one of the things I thought of at the very last minute, which I was happy to think of, was if there were going to be different rooms in there, that concrete slab would theoretically carry the sound from one room to another through the low end.
Yes.
And so what I did at the last minute is I was like, let's find out. So I brought somebody in with a concrete saw, and they cut out the shape of the room, of the walls where they would be, and then we just refilled that with this like sealant, this kind of gasket sealant stuff.
Cool.
And so it physically isolated the slabs from each other.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. And I think it helped.
I'm sure it did.
Pretty great. Everything's worked great in my place too.
Yeah. So what you did, I'm actually glad you mentioned that because I've always been curious if that's possible. And the idea of what Liz just said is called an isolated concrete slab. And if you were going to build a professional recording studio from the ground up with multiple rooms, that would be the pro way to do it, is to have what they call isolated slabs. And they use some sort of filler, which I can't remember the exact off the top of my head. But usually I recommend people hire a concrete specialist who knows how to lay isolated slabs because it's a little beyond DIY stuff. Although taking a concrete saw and filling it, that's pretty DIY.
This is like a nice, clever, simple, hack. Like if you've already got a garage that's already got the slab, some sort of space, and you're thinking about doing it and you want to isolate it, just get a concrete saw, cut right through it. I'm sure the slab was still connected on the ends by the walls, but who cares? It doesn't.
Yeah, no, it's better than nothing. And I would even say like you said, the low frequencies may be an issue, like kick drums and bass. But it's probably not the end of the world. If you built a control room and a live room in a garage, it's still going to be light years better than any other home studio.
My control room is right next to, a live room space. And then there's a dead room, and the dead room is where we would, maybe really crank up a bass amp. And I tried that. Right. And it's amazing how well
that's incredible.
It was able to soundproof the two. So we'll talk more about that too. And what I learned is that it's an amalgam. It's a whole bunch of different parts that need to go together effectively to really create a good soundproofing. And it's never one thing. But I will point out something I remember very much about it. It's scary at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's very scary. It's like, it's exciting and it's scary because there's this fear that it might not work or that I'll do all this thing and it won't be right.
Yes.
And I actually just helped my brother do a commercial music school in Brooklyn.
Oh, cool.
And it was, I wasn't like, I was just sort of like, casually consulting, saying like, well, you really need to think about these things. That's the extent of it. But, seeing him go through that process again and that like, oh my God, if this works, in that world, if it didn't work, it could be like, it's a big deal. When you're talking about spaces where, you're fearful of lawsuits and things like that, it's very, very scary stuff. When you're talking about home studios, it's also scary because it can be your livelihood, but it's a little more like you just don't want it to be a pain in the butt or, have a problem with your neighbors and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I was in the exact same boat as you, Lish. Like I was so afraid that it's not going to work and you can't know if it's going to work until you finish it. Like there's no like halfway mark where you're like, okay, we're halfway through. Let's see if it works. It has to be sealed and completed before you know if it's soundproof or not.
Yeah. And it's not like a little experiment where you build 10 of them and then finally on the 10th one, you've got it right.
You're
like,
exactly.
I got to get it right once.
Because it's a construction cost. And like I said at the beginning, tens of thousands of dollars is much more realistic when you're doing any sort of construction than under $10,000.
Yeah.
So you're putting in a lot of money and you don't want to mess it up.
So let's back up just a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
You got up. We met through your generous follow-up, your kind email about getting up at the Metro Council and stuff. So tell us a little bit about that experience. So were you thinking about doing a studio, and this stuff was going on in 2020 with the Metro Council? Just give us your brief version of all that.
Yeah. So it was kind of a blessing that I didn't even know was coming because. Let's see. I don't remember when I guess maybe I heard about you through your podcast first. It's such a natural thing to like, I feel like I've known Liz for years now, but we sort of do and don't know each other. But I knew he was involved in this city council thing with trying to get studios legalized, home studios legalized in Nashville, which it seems crazy for all those who aren't familiar with this. But up until Liz, with his amazing, relentless effort of going to city council and pushing through some legislation, you technically could have a home studio and it was illegal as a business. So that was kind of crazy. And all of us, I had always been using home studios since I moved here. So I knew that I wanted to be a part of this.
Let's clarify that again in case the Rockstars didn't get that. So it used to be that you could have a home studio in Nashville and you could work from it by yourself.
Right. It couldn't be a business.
But you couldn't have a customer come over to your house.
Right.
So
even a co-writer, right? I don't know.
I mean,
it's questionable what a customer is. Yeah.
If I look at it, I'm like, if you're making money, income from somebody, if it all boils down to the same thing, Basically, it was, calling Nashville Music City, and everybody who's living and working here is making
illegal music
one form or another with other people in their home studios. Yeah. And Nashville was calling it illegal. And so we had the opportunity to change the law. And I poured all my energy into that in 2020 to push through the new legislation. But all I could do was just try and get everybody's attention and hope that everybody in the community cared and wanted to come out. Mm-hmm. And so, you're to me, you're the hero of this story because you came out and spoke at the public hearing, and spoke out. So what do you remember about that? What was it like to get up and talk to the city council?
Super intense. Yeah. I had never been to a city council hearing. It never really was on my to-do list. Just in terms of the timeline, I was actually in the process of building this studio in 2020. So we finished in August of 2020. And I think I went to speak in the spring or something. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
Or would it have been that summer?
It was July 7th was the day
so
that
I was
finally
just finishing the studio and about to open up my doors. And I already had a home studio and I was bringing clients over technically.
Everybody was.
Yeah. So I went and sat at this council meeting with Liz and about probably 100 or so other home studio enthusiasts, and some who are very successful, which was really cool. including Liz. And I went up there and kind of offhand, you were like, does anyone else want to speak? And I was like, I'll do it. And went up and just sort of ad hoc'd like a speech of why it's so important that we pass this and why musicians, Nashville especially needs creative entrepreneurs like this to push the economy forward in this town. And yeah, it was wild. And I remember you're like, I hope you didn't give away too much information about your address and stuff. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing about public hearings is you have to say your name and where your address is and everything. And then you're also talking about your world. And it's like, you're like, wait a minute,
you suddenly gave away the goods.
I hope you guys aren't just trying to like entrap me, to get up and say what we need in the city here. But anyway, it was a pretty amazing experience. Thank you so much for doing that.
Hey, thank you.
It's awesome. And Rockstars, if you were part of that as well out there and you're listening now, thank you so much. So then you moved forward and you did this, and it's like, you've got the fear of, is Nashville even going to let me do what I need to do thing? Totally different topic.
Yeah.
We nailed that one. Well done, Rockstars.
Yes, awesome.
But then you've got the fear of, okay, now that I get a shot at this, I'm going to build my studio, and will it work? And all that, and the sound stuff. So talk a little bit about your studio that we're in right now. You built a specific type of studio. Yeah. I think, I've heard you talk about it in your videos, Rockstars. He's got and there's a link in the show notes to your YouTube channel. There's a bunch of great YouTube videos there, and your website. And I think you do a free webinar tutorial kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I call it a free soundproofing workshop that you can check out if you want to go deeper on the soundproofing stuff as well.
Yeah. Is there a link you want to just say out loud right now?
Yeah. Soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop.
Okay, great. That's easy to remember.
Yeah, I do.
But don't watch it yet, Rockstars. Listen to the rest of this interview and then
listening.
Go check it out. All right. So you decided to build what, again, I'll shout out to Roger Mutino. What he hit me to the term a writer's room, which is like
that's a great term.
A studio as one big room that you're in. Your speakers are in there. If you're going to record, you're recording in there. Mm-hmm. You can get up out of your chair and walk over to the drum set when it's set up, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm a little jealous because now that I'm doing more music, I'm like, wait a minute, I feel a little bit trapped in the control room.
Yeah. Yeah. The control room becomes your writer's room. And then you're like, but then there's the live room.
Yeah. So that's a first consideration, Rockstars. What kind of studio do you want? Do you want to have a studio where you're the engineer and the musicians are out there on the the quote, other side of the glass the whole time? Or do you want to have a studio where you're going to be playing the instruments and doing it that way? So that's a first consideration. It's a lot easier in a way to build a writer's room because it's so simple. All your energy goes into one space in one room. And
there's like the stuff we'll talk about in this episode about how to soundproof applies to multiple rooms. But if you think of it logically, every extra room is more cost, obviously, and more corners and more difficult things in the construction process, especially when it comes to ventilation and air conditioning and heating.
Right.
So those are the things I think about a lot when I'm thinking of people who I'm trying to teach that have multiple rooms. Another thing that, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Liz, is like I came from the bedroom producer environment where it always was one room. And when I designed this studio, I was like, I kind of want it just to be like one big bedroom. Like it kind of feels like a big master bedroom in here, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
And for those of you who can't see, I have cathedral ceilings, so it's peaked at the top, and it's about 275 square feet with about 11-foot peak, if you can imagine that. So not huge, but also not small. Bigger than most.
And then I think there's 4 very tiny windows. So it's enough to let light in.
5 windows.
5, okay.
3 on that wall, and then two kind of Ryman style windows at the top. Nice church detail, windows.
Yeah. And it's funny because the mini split unit is right under them, so it makes a smiley face.
It does make a smiley face. Yeah, which is kind of great.
So, that's another thing to consider. It's like, do you want natural light in your studio? Do you not want natural light in your studio? I do have a window. So I have a window that goes to the live room, and then natural light comes in from there. Oh, cool. And then like your studio, I have a door that just opens right to the outside, which I love because when the weather's nice, I love being able to, so much for soundproofing at that moment. But,
right. Yeah. But
if I'm not doing something loud, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Very cool. So Rockstars, you got to think about that. Let's just talk about all this stuff in the context of your, writer's room, single room studio, because anything we say about that is going to apply to a multi-room facility.
It is, yeah. I think it's an easy way to explain it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I teach soundproofing, I do kind of think of it as one room at a time. Yeah.
My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at maxsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Okay, cool. Well, let's start right at the beginning. Tell us a little bit, briefly, just describe what's in this studio so rockstars can start to visualize it and picture it.
Like in the studio?
What's your workspace? You've got your speaker zone. Talk a little bit about that without going into the details yet. And then you've got, the back of the room. There's a couch. There's stuff, panels on the walls, stuff like that. But, in your words, tell us. And is there like secret storage? Is that a thing?
There is sort of secret storage. I mean, Liz was like, there's a bathroom attached to the outside, but you have to go outside to go to the bathroom. And he's like, did you really want it to be like outside like this? I was like, no, Liz, I did not think through my design very carefully.
Come on, band practice. All good band practice spaces, you have to go outside to pee. Right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. This is no different. I do have a bathroom though, just so you know, it's not just peeing in the woods. But storage was something that I sort of thought about, but I also didn't put a closet in. And so there's like little cabinets, like little places, like wooden boxes where I store cables and stuff like that. But in retrospect, I think it would have been cool to have like a little storage room that wasn't soundproofed. That was just an extra room,
In all fairness, no matter what you do for your studio, you're going to wish you had more space.
Yes, I think I agree with that. Yeah.
Most of us.
Yeah.
And then if you're like me, you just fill it up anyway.
Right, exactly.
But so just to reiterate what you just said, for storage in your one-room studio, you sort of cleverly took things that double as a bench, or you lift up the bench and it's a storage inside, right?
Exactly.
So that's a pretty smart, simple way to do it.
I think it is. And I think, taking some ideas from all those van lifers where they like build their storage units in the van, thinking like that in your studio is not a bad idea, because we have a similar need of like just needing cubby holds for mics or things like that. And you can make it look really elegant at the same time.
Yeah. And then as far as things like cables and stuff, you can always just hang hooks on walls to hang cables. Yeah. My tip, Rockstars, is go start out with the heavy screw and metal hooks that are strong, because I started with pegboard and those regular ones that go right into the pegboard, thinking you can put them anywhere. And they can't handle the weight of the cables. You end up overloading them, and then they just rip out, and then you can't rescue the pegboard. Yeah. So unless you did something with like real wood pegboard where it's like strong,
Yeah. Yeah. We can talk about that too. Like, just to jump ahead briefly, when you build a soundproof studio, it's recommended to use 2 layers of 5/8" drywall for your walls and ceilings. And what you can do as a little trick is take something that is the same thickness, or ideally, really, it needs to be the same mass or weight as the 5/8" drywall, which is 2.2 pounds per square foot. And if you get wood, like plywood, you can put that first layer of drywall can be plywood instead of drywall. And then you can drill into your walls and hang heavy guitars, whatever you want, because you've got actual plywood. So that's kind of a little hint or a trick that is really something that is a good idea for most studios.
Yeah. And another thing you can do is you could just take a long wooden board, stretch it across the outside of the wall, and find studs and screw into
them in, yeah.
But do be aware that every time you screw through your floated kind of soundproofed drywall to reach something on the other side, you're sort of physically reconnecting your surfaces. So, again, that gets into the territory of like, some things are a little, ethereal and hocus pocusy in soundproofing, and other things are just like, this is absolutely how it has to be, and it's a combination.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're leaping around a little bit. So
we are. Yeah. I was supposed to describe my setup. So I basically have My listening spot is about 7 feet out from the front wall of the studio, and I've got my speakers set up, and I've created what is known as a reflection-free zone. So I have panels on my left and right ear.
And then
the
very
walls.
quickly, your room is a rectangle. Which
It's a
wall
rectangle.
do the speakers go on?
The front wall, the short wall.
A short wall.
Short
So
wall, yeah.
the long wall is like the one that is to your left and your right when you're sitting in the mixed position and shooting back in the room.
And a lot of people ask me, why did you not splay your walls? Everyone's like, oh, parallel walls, red flag. And from my research and everything I've learned, parallel walls, yes, they create slap echo and room modes, but so does splayed walls. It can just reduce the slap echo. But when you have a rectangular room, you can still treat it and you know exactly what room modes you're going to have if you were to build your rectangular room using certain equations. So there's that's like going down another rabbit hole, but
and let's
my room is rectangular, just so people know.
Yeah, it's rectangular. And let's also clarify a couple of terms. So modes and flutter echo or slap echo. A mode is that's the tuned, what is it? It's a half frequency wavelength or something like that is the lowest mode for a room.
Yeah, so room modes, it gets really complicated pretty quickly, and I don't even know if I can describe it
just
perfectly.
Think about it. Essentially, think about it as the low end below like 100 hertz.
Yeah, I mean, that can be like the tricky points, but like the easiest way I think about room modes and acoustics and nodes and things like this is that when sound waves hit a wall and start bouncing around in your room, you're having continuous sound waves that are still coming from your speaker or your instrument or your voice. And those sound waves are going to collide into each other. And some of those waves will either cancel each other out or they'll boost the wave. Just like imagine waves in a bathtub kind of sloshing around, and some of those waves are going to increase the wave or decrease it. And what that happens in every room regardless. Like there's nothing you can do about that except record outside in like the middle of like a desert. That's very quiet.
Yeah, and we'll talk about ways to deal with those room modes, but those room modes are boosts, they're peaks and valleys in low frequency energy, essentially is a way to think of it.
Yeah.
Low to up to lower mid kind of stuff. I don't know, is it up to like 300 hertz or 500 hertz?
Yeah.
You think about the modes. I once read that you think about the room modes up to maybe 300 hertz, and everything above that, you think about ray frequencies like reflections off walls and stuff.
Right.
And so to back up, when you talked about the slap echo between parallel walls, yes, the room mode exists between the parallel walls, but the slap echo is like in the higher frequencies. It's like a sound traveling across a hand clap, and it goes and hits one wall and then bounces to the other wall and then bounces back and back and back. So you get that bring,
like a really fast delay.
Yeah, and and again, like you, I was like, oh wait, why do the walls have to be parallel or not parallel? But the answer was that the slap echo is easy to treat. All you need is a soft surface on one of those walls.
Exactly.
Goodbye slap echo, because it can't bounce off both walls anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas room mode, you have to address like, okay, how are we going to actually, absorb or soak up this particular frequency or whatever?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So continuing on from there, you've got the rectangle for your space. You've got the speakers in the short wall end of the room firing down the length of the room. And then you're sitting on
a couch.
Yeah,
the studio couch, which actually almost works as a bass trap. It's kind of got, when I put the couch in, I was like, oh yeah, it kind of helped tighten up the room a little bit, which was nice.
Yeah. That's what they say. Well, a lot of times they say just stick an overstuffed couch on the back wall.
Totally.
And it's like an instant bass trap.
It kind of is, especially for that corner where the floor and the wall meet. And then in the back of the room here, I have diffusion panels, which I got from GIK Acoustics, which I like. Shout out to them. And these panels are actually a mixture of diffusion and absorption. So they have a diffracting panel that's going to diffuse the sound out into the room in a more pleasant way. Is the way I describe diffusion. It kind of evenly disperses sound back towards your listening position. When sound hits the wall without a diffusion panel, it's just going to bounce back directly at your ears, and it can cause the same problems that we were talking about earlier with modes and different problems with comb filtering and things like that. Then I have bass traps in the back corners as well. And
Yeah, you did a clever thing too. You've got like a square column bass trap with a triangle bass trap above it, which gives you half of the top of that square to make a nice little tabletop.
Yeah, and it's kind of inadvertently that way. I wouldn't recommend that,
like a plant on
but the
that's
plants
great.
on it, yeah, I know. So what happened is the triangle bass traps were from my original recording studios in the rental units, and then when I designed this space, GIK Acoustics, they have some consulting that they do for free, and he was like, your room's a lot bigger now. I recommend getting these bigger bass traps. And I was like, I don't really want to like sell the ones I have. I'm just going to buy 4 of the bigger bass traps, and I'm going to stack the other ones on top. And I actually have 2 leftover bass traps that you can see kind of that became just a little addition there.
Just
that
more tabletop.
more tabletop space. So, and I will say that, my room is always a work in progress. Like if you look at the very top, the bass traps should technically go all the way to the ceiling in what's known as the trihedral corner, where the wall, the ceiling, 2 walls and a ceiling meet.
You mean the impossible to measure how to make the cut corner?
Exactly. I was going to say, I was like, the math that it would take to do that, I'm like, I just don't really want to do it. So, as I teach these things, I'm always trying to teach people the best way to do it. But even I have
now I'm going to add something
done some
to that
different
little
things
tip that I've learned recently. When you're figuring out how to do construction and then you get these odd corners and odd shapes and you're like, oh my God, how do I cut this, tile or this wood to go around that thing so that it fits? And it can be very perplexing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, thanks to things like YouTube Shorts, all you have to do is get on one of those feeds where they're like, amazing construction techniques and these short videos. And I've watched them and I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. I'm like, you'll see some guy do this like wild protractor, thing that you tighten and you measure shapes and corners.
Cool.
And then it all lines up perfectly. So just go watch those on your spare time, for a little bit.
YouTube is incredible.
You're like, oh, wait a minute, that'll work for my corner in my studio.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to add one other thing too. You did a wonderful job of constructing this whole thing. The building itself is made out of really nice materials. So if this was converted into a bedroom, it would feel great,
Right, exactly.
But I'm going to just add that, and then your studio treatments are a great combination. And I'm saying this for you, rock stars, of both looking really cool, but also not looking like extremely expensive, high dollar, but like DIY achievable. And that's what I wanted to point out. So rock stars, the stuff that we're talking about here is like, you can totally do this. You can totally have a pro studio with pro looking panels that don't have to cost you $1 million.
Definitely.
And you can figure out how to do it yourself. And Wilson's the guy to tell you about that.
I will. Shameless plug for me. There's a lot of YouTube channels out there that teach you how to build panels. And, but I have one on Soundproof Your Studio, YouTube, that shows you how to build these exact panels, which are modeled after the GIK acoustic panels, which a lot of these are, but the ones behind you, Lidge, there, I built myself. So you can see the difference in how they look, and they're pretty much the same. And they look great. And those were just built for about $60 a piece. You can build cheaper panels, but like I said, like these are top of the line. I copied the GIK.
I'm going to have to make that
ones.
YouTube video. Maybe I'll make the video and then you can put it on yours channel if you need.
Sure.
My video will be how to make an acoustic panel for $5 because I made
they're
the
out there.
cheapest ones.
Trust me, Lidge. They're out there, and I'm like in the middle. I'm like, hey, you could do the $5 one, but you could also do a slightly nicer one, which I
my
guarantee
$5
will be awesome.
ones won't compete with your $60.
Yeah, you could probably do them cheaper even if you.
All right, cool. So the panels now. How deep are these panels that you have? You have these things that are. What are they? 2x4 or bigger than that?
They're 4x8. I mean, 2x4. You're right. Sorry, not 4x8. 2x4. Yeah,
2x4 panels that are about 4 inches deep or something, or is that 6 inches deep?
Yeah, those are all going to be the 4-inch deep panels. The panel itself might be closer to 6 inches, but there's 4 inches of insulation in there with a 1-inch air gap behind the back.
And then the nice thing about building same size panels, Rockstars, is it makes it easier for you to construct a bunch of these. Yeah. And then you just figure out how to put them up on your walls in ways that make sense. If you're going to, we'll talk about a couple of things here. So in your mix zone, you need what you just described as a reflection-free zone. And I think you will end up with a lot of symmetrical panel placements. But once you go away from the mix zone out into the rest of a studio, things don't have to be symmetrical as far as panels. You can begin to stagger them with that knowledge that as long as there's one on one of the walls that's parallel, you won't get the slap echo in that spot.
Right.
So then they can start to stagger left and right kind of things.
Yeah.
Right?
And it becomes way more of an art form. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it because you do a lot more with like a live room of like how you acoustically treated your live room. Because I could tell you for sure how to acoustically treat a control room. That's fairly straightforward. With a live room, there's a lot more play. Like, do you want to have diffusion? Do you want to have absorption diffusion on certain walls? And, so there's a lot more that you can do design-wise to dial in your room the way you want it. And it can be something that you do over time. You can listen to your room and be like, for example, my room, I really want to hang these cool diffusion panels that are like almost like a wave of wood. Yeah, I want to hang 2 of those up here because I think it'll help with the backside of my room here. But when I make it huge and have some Grammys, that's what I'll do.
Well, you just keep adding things. It took me a long time. I added a lot of things in my studio.
Totally.
All right, we're going to talk about that stuff right now. Adam Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Adam Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low-profile A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true 3-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a 3-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now. My guest is Wilson Harwood, joining us from soundproofyourstudio.com. And we are sitting in here in his studio right now. What's the name of your studio again? It's
Elevated Music.
Elevated Music.
Coming
studio.
From my Colorado days.
Right on.
Although I realized moving here, it has like this Christian overtone.
That works great in Nashville, right?
Yeah, it works in Nashville. Yeah, although sometimes they reach out and I'm like, I don't really do Christian music usually, but...
Well, music is music. It depends on
music is music.
You ready to jam?
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
So, Rockstars, we're going to jump now into this reflection-free zone. So tell us what that is. Describe what you've learned. You've briefly thrown out terms like 38%. And,
just confusing terms.
We know a little bit about panels. So panels, you talked about your diffusion panels, but then the other kind of panel is the absorption panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk about how we can set up our speakers on that short end of the wall. If somebody's starting, right now they're just standing in an empty room and they're like, where do I put stuff?
Right.
It all begins with the speakers on stands, right?
It does, yeah. Yeah, and it could even begin even more than sometimes, So let me talk about the 38% rule. And this is just a general rule that is a good starting point, which is if you're in a rectangular room, the long ways of the room, you can say what is 38% of the length of that room, and that would be the best listening spot. So where you sit listening to your speakers so that everything acoustically works out in your favor, basically is the idea. And I've found that, in most bedroom studios, that spot is pretty close to the front wall, maybe like 3-4 feet off the front wall. And in a bigger room like this one, where I've got a 20-foot length in this studio, my listening spot is closer to about 7 feet from the front wall.
Right. And that taps into some of the issues about room modes.
It does.
So essentially, if you're, we're going to keep coming back to this. So if you are turning up your music loud enough out of your speakers to even activate the room modes,
mm-hmm.
so that they think about like blowing on a Coke bottle. If you blow on it just right and enough, it starts to activate the tone in the Coke bottle, right?
Right.
I think that's a fair enough analogy. Then that means you're getting these bass frequencies adding up and canceling out, and they're affecting what you hear. And so that 38% rule has something to do with putting you in a sweet spot where you're getting the least of all evils.
Yeah. Right? And again, least of all evils is a great term for this, because it's like you're never getting perfection, but that doesn't matter. Like we're always just striving to get the best we can with what we have.
Yeah.
So that 38% rule is a good starting place. And I say starting place because I'm like, if you hate that spot in your room, move it. Yeah. Like don't worry about it. It's a starting place. And then what you can do to follow up with Liz's question was like, then you can set up your speakers to make, ideally what they say is a equilateral triangle from that listening spot. So I recommend putting your speakers as close to the front wall as possible. A lot of people want to pull them off the front wall. I have mine, if you look at them, they're a little bit off the front wall, but I also put some bass traps on my front wall to try to absorb some of the bass that bounces off the speakers and hits that front wall.
And you're rocking the Neumanns?
These are the Neumanns. I just got them this fall, and they've been amazing. And I also know that if you read your monitor's manual, the Neumanns have a sweet spot where you want them to be off the wall a certain amount, but not super far. So every monitor, I highly recommend that you read their manual and figure out where they recommend you put the speaker in your room. And I used to have the Yamaha HS8s, and I know they recommended that they should be 1 meter off all walls. And I was like, okay, that's impossible.
They were like, we just want you to go behind our speakers and see all the cool knobs we put there for you.
Yeah. And I was like, that's pretty hard to do. So, but for most people, because of something called speaker boundary interference response, which is basically the low frequencies hitting the front wall and then bouncing off of the front wall into your ears, that can cause the same cancellation that we've been talking about. So by putting your speakers right up against the front wall, so there's literally almost no space at all, you're going to greatly reduce the amount of SBIR that you're getting.
And that comes with the territory when you're talking about near field monitors.
Yes.
The other kind of monitor that pretty much almost none of us are doing in our studios is the soffit, which means the speakers are actually in the wall and they're on the surface of the wall itself.
Yeah.
And the benefit of those is there is no reflection other than what's coming out of the speaker out of the wall. Anyway.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do that. So.
You could put those in the wall. I think they're built to do that, but it would be kind of crazy.
Yeah, you have to build a wall to accommodate it if you're going to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we'll stick to reality.
Yeah. Let's stick to just home studios design. Studios.
So now the other things that you did, there isn't one right answer, but very briefly, what did you learn about speaker stands and like what tips do you want to give the rock stars for?
Yeah.
As they start to find the sweet spot for their speakers, what do they want to know about the speaker stands so that they get the best experience out of that?
Yeah. So I do recommend, if you have the budget, getting, some higher quality speaker stands. The ultimate support stands are great. And these are, for me, these are freestanding in the room. They're on stands. They're not on my studio desk. And the option way to go is to put your speakers on your studio desk and then use something like RLX pads, speaker pads.
To like isolate it from the table itself.
Yeah. But I would say that's not as good as having their own isolated stands.
Yeah. And so there's this it's like a combination of decoupling. You want the stands to be so heavy and so strong that they don't move easily. Yeah. And you also want them sort of decoupled from the floor. Or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So I think mine are these big, heavy sound anchor stands that then have like stacks and stacks of garden paver stones on them to keep them perfectly weighted and in place. And they all come down to a teeny tiny sharp metal point as they hit the floor, which of course will also destroy your wood floor, rock stars. So make sure you're aware of that. Yeah. And just for full transparency, the process of even moving those to locate them, just tore up the floor right there. And that's just normal. Yeah. That's normal.
That's
so my point is don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about tear hurting your floor. You might have a carpeted floor in your place too. And then having them level too. That's another challenge,
Yeah.
especially in rental places where you're like, you don't
It
have a lot of
is.
control over the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I actually, my ultimate support stands were, I want to say like 3 feet tall or something, like 3.5 feet. And I actually raised them up, went down to Home Depot, bought some, like you said, some cinder block stones, like really heavy as I could find blocks. And I raised them up so that they were at my ear height. Because the new Neumanns are
Right.
actually sitting sideways. They don't sit vertically.
It's almost better to start with a stand that's a little too short because you can always add.
Right.
Again, those paver stones are cheap.
Yeah,
Those
totally.
and they come in big sizes and they're very, very heavy. You can put those down on the ground and give yourself that ability to scoot things around.
Yeah.
But just know that first process of moving the speakers easily around until you like where they are is the first move. So make it easy on yourself to do that, Rockstars. And then the next is, okay, what do you have? Do you have a console? Do you have a table?
Totally.
Do you have a desk? You did a clever thing where you've just got a table that looks like you just grab it from IKEA.
Man, this is like $100. No, probably even, you could probably get my table on Facebook Marketplace for like $25. It's
great.
like, it's like I have this like ridiculous studio, and then you walk in and you're like, your studio desk is not something to write home about.
But it's just a good point. You don't have to have something fancy. It's
it's 2023.
You probably have more area to put your coffee down than most. In fact, my coffee's on your desk right now.
Your coffee's there. And I actually wish I had more desk space sometimes.
And then you cleverly figured out a way to put your screens on something else behind the desk.
Yeah.
Standing up. And you did a very clever thing where you gave yourself a second screen that's kind of like leaning back underneath the first one.
And I've had a lot of people
angled look
ask like, how'd you get the angled screen? And I said, I went to Walmart and I bought a cheap screen and then I angled it back. And it's like, it's so DIY. I was joking.
And are you on
Liz.
a Mac or a PC?
I'm on a Mac, but I use the Mac Mini. And so then the monitors are both just, third-party monitors.
And I think Mac gives us 2 monitor outs still, right?
Yeah, you can do more if you just like jank, get some sort of conversion. But yeah, there's an HDMI out and there's a USB-C out that I think I'm using for my monitors.
Yeah, I don't know. It used to be that you had a limit of 2 monitors, and I don't know whether Mac made it like lots now, but there's other software that will let you use iPads as monitors through Wi-Fi and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
which
there's
is
a
pretty
variety
cool.
of things to check out.
Yeah, I could use another monitor. I mean, I could always use more monitors.
I feel that way. I'm like, I just want I don't want to have to open a plugin. I just want that plugin to already be on the monitor dedicated. It's always there.
Yeah, like we should have racks of like monitor gear.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep jumping forward. So the cool desk plan that you came up with allowed you to do things like have a full-size weighted MIDI keyboard right there.
Yes.
Arturia. Yeah. Oh boy, I bet you got some cool synths, don't you?
I do. Yeah. It's awesome.
And then in front of that is the keyboard and mouse. So what a clever solution for having like a really great work desk plus that keyboard. You can probably bang on it and the desk isn't going to move around on like a cheap music stand might or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And the Arturia keyboard, as us, like Liz said, being like a songwriter studio, everything I do as a producer is more like that songwriter vibe. I work a lot with singer-songwriters. And so we're creating in the one room. Having the keyboard right in front of me allows me to create really quickly. In a perfect world, I've thought about it a lot. Like buying a custom-made desk down the road would be really cool to have the keyboard underneath, like a pull-out.
Right.
And then try to reduce the reflections off the keyboard, which this is like super nerdy. But in a perfect world, like you look at mastering engineers, they have as small a desk as possible because they're really audio files.
Right.
So any desk is going to cause some sort of
I think that's one of those issues we're not trying to solve.
No, we're not trying to solve.
Mine's got stuff all over the place, and that's just part of
just part of the recording
as a
studio.
creator. So let's lots of cool things we could talk about, but let's keep coming back to this reflection free zone. So what does that mean? So you're sitting in your sweet spot, you got your speakers set up on stands, you moved them. How did you, what were you listening for when you said, my speakers are in a good spot now, so now I know this is where my listening.
And that's a great question. There's a great book called Mixing with Your Mind. Have you heard of that book?
I don't know, maybe.
It's really awesome, and the author you'll have to look up. But he talks.
If I interviewed the author, my apologies to you.
You may have, my apologies to you because the name has slipped my mind. But I love his description of imagine your speakers. They can go in and they can go out, and they're on this sort of plane, and you're just trying to listen and find that sweet spot where everything comes into sort of clarity, and it's not so wide that it's sort of blurry, and it's not so tight that everything's on top of itself. And so you're trying to get as best of a three-dimensional sound field as possible. And then I think it's hard because you're also doing this while trying to keep your equilateral triangle, keep your sweet spot.
Yeah.
So if we look at my sweet spot as, let's say it's 7 feet out from the wall, and that's like behind my head, because you sit a little bit in front of that 38% point. So I think my speakers are roughly 6 feet to make that equilateral triangle. So I started with like, okay, I'm sitting in the sweet spot, and I'm going to do 6 feet to the left speaker, 6 feet to the right speaker. And then that's going to mean that it has to be 6 feet between the two speakers. And that 6 feet between the two speakers, you have to find a place on your speaker that you're measuring from. And usually that's maybe like the tweeter for the three-way speakers. It's kind of between the tweeter and the mid-range, I think is where your ears are kind of technically listening from. So this is all kind of getting technical. So it's a mixture of the art of listening and a mixture of science and actually creating the physical
And I
spot.
think just so you don't beat yourself up about it, rock stars, prepare to spend days moving your speaker around and listening until you decide you like what you got. So don't feel like you're supposed to figure it out in an hour or something.
No. And yeah, give yourself like, for mine, I remember I didn't have these speakers lifted up, and a friend came and he's like, man, your speakers are so low. You're like, the sweet spot's hitting your chest. And I was like, you're right. And so I lifted them up, and I was like, oh yeah, that's even better. And so it's playing around, and you're learning as you go. So definitely don't beat yourself up, but hopefully what we're talking about gets you even closer to the truth.
Yeah. All right. So now you're in the sweet spot.
Ideally.
Is it time to talk about the mirror trick?
Yeah, we could talk about the mirror trick for sure. So the mirror trick is you're going to need someone else, a friend or a partner, to help you with this. But you're going to sit in your sweet spot, in your chair, facing your speaker's listening position, which is directly in the middle between the two speakers. And you're going to have someone hang like one of those Target mirrors, like one of those, floor wall or wall hanging mirrors on the wall.
Yeah, the cheap ones.
A cheap one that's not super heavy. And have them place it against the wall and go into the far corner, I guess, and then slowly move the mirror towards the back of the room behind you.
Sliding it
along the wall. And where you first see the front of the speakers come into the mirror, that you can mark that on the wall. And that's where you want to hang your first acoustic panel, the side of that acoustic panel. And then you keep sliding it till you don't see the front of the speaker anymore. Am I explaining that right? That's kind of the way I did it.
Essentially your mirror is letting you know that if you can see the speaker, that means your ear can also hear the sound of the speaker bouncing off the wall in that same location.
Totally.
Because the acoustic reflection is the same as the light reflection.
Light reflection, yeah. It's a cool trick for seeing sound waves.
Yeah, so you essentially want to put a panel up wherever you can see a reflection of the speaker. Now I'm going to qualify that, because really you need to put a panel where you can see a reflection of the closest speaker. So if you're looking if you're sitting in the sweet spot and you're looking on the right wall, looking to your right at that wall, and you've got a left speaker and a right speaker, you want to put a panel so you don't see a reflection of the right speaker, but it's not the end of the world if you could see a reflection of the left speaker. And the reason why that is, I think, is because it's so far away, the left speaker, to go all the way to the opposite wall and into your right ear, that it's not competing.
Yeah.
And what is it that we're not competing with? Why are we putting up reflection absorptions?
Well, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind when we were talking about this is that we should mention the term like first reflection, because it's like the first sound wave that's going to hit the wall and then bounce back to your ear. That's what you're trying to reduce. So you're trying to absorb those sound waves with the panels. Yeah.
And this is a little bit of a loaded question, but it's because we want to hear the sound that's coming out of the speaker come straight to our ear.
Right. Okay. That's what you're getting at. Yeah.
And what happens is, like you were saying about waves adding up and canceling each other, same thing with the sound coming out of the speaker. The sound reflecting off that wall and then mixing back at your ear again, along with that direct sound from the speaker, creates this comb filtering time phase delay between all the different frequencies, and pretty much screws up your sound, right?
Yeah. And you wouldn't even know it. I mean, we listen to speakers in rooms all the time. We say, oh, the speakers sound great. But what we're trying to do as engineers and mixing engineers and recording engineers is, like Liz said, get as pure, I think pure is a good word, as pure of a sound from the speaker as possible to our ears. And it's funny, you guys are probably like, well, why not just use headphones? Well, you're right. Headphones will give you the most accurate reproduction of sound because there's no room for the sound to bounce around in.
Solves a lot of soundproofing issues too, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So hey, let's end this podcast right now, get a laptop and some headphones, and you're good to go. But you guys don't want that because mixing and recording on headphones is not ideal. And to hear music in the space of a three-dimensional speaker field of stereo speakers is really important for us to hear, not just what it sounds like on headphones. And as we get into Atmos mixing, I mean, there's a whole nother world and a whole nother reason to have a dialed in acoustic studio.
Yeah. So to reiterate, we've got our sweet spot identified. We got our speakers placed. We are putting up panels everywhere where we can see a reflection. And I'm going to point out there's a couple of places we don't think of automatically. We usually think about like panel on the right wall, panel on the left wall. Well, took me a minute in my studio before I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's a reflection off the ceiling too. And that's where we get into the idea of a cloud is basically a hanging panel that does the same thing. And most of us have a flat ceiling. You happen to have a vaulted ceiling, like a church or barn ceiling, right?
Yeah. Cathedral ceiling.
And that's got a different set of reflections, but still a panel, cloud makes a huge difference on the focus of the sound.
Yeah.
So doing that. And then the next one is the floor, which never gets a panel. Really. You've got the desk there, you got other stuff. And that's that's the one where you're just like, yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
And if you can avoid having like a really reflective surface between the speakers in your ear, that's great, but most of the time you can't. So you just blow it off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's definitely a point where you got to just make music, have fun, and not obsess over this anymore.
Yeah.
I put down a rug eventually, but you don't have to have a rug. Having a nice wooden floor could be nice, but like Liz said, we don't really worry about the floor too much. Rugs by their nature don't really absorb sound the way that your acoustic panels do.
That's true.
So, even if you had a nice fluffy rug, it's probably not doing much except feeling nice on your toes.
Yeah, which is good to do. But one of the challenges, of course, with trying to treat the floor of a studio is a lot of us want to have a roll around studio chair, and they don't roll on rugs in the same way. This one's a, what do they call it? A short nap rug or something woven, right?
Yeah. So it rolls pretty good. Yeah.
But what I learned in my studio, which was great when Carl Tatz came over and redesigned the control room, was we could leave the floor as a wooden floor, even though it's fake wood these days. It's all just vinyl, fake wood. Yeah. Thank God for that. But the ceiling can get the treatment. Same thing with the slap issue.
Yes.
Where you'll really only need a treatment on one wall to prevent it from echoing. Same thing with floor and ceiling. So Rockstars, if you can treat your ceiling with panels and things that hang down, or, what are some of your suggestions for the quick and dirty, easiest way to just stick something up on the ceiling?
Yeah. I think building a 2x4 panel for most bedroom musicians, I used a 2x4 panel above my listening spot for both the rentals I was in. And I just hung them with, usually you can go down to Home Depot and get some sort of like hook, and then maybe like a little bit of like pretty heavy gauge wire so that it holds it, but it doesn't have to be too crazy. And you can hang it. Also, there's companies, like I said, GIK Acoustics that sell ceiling panels that, if you want, you can buy something. And if you're not very handy, that'll be a little easier.
Well, and then there's have you ever had any luck with like the spray adhesive Oralex kind of stuff? Or do you find that that's mostly just...
I haven't used it. Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think it can work. I don't know what the measurements are on those things.
Yeah. In terms of the absorption coefficients.
But those are ones, there are options out there, Rockstars, where you literally just spray adhesive the back of a piece of foam and you just stick it to the wall or ceiling.
Yeah.
Probably got to stick a lot of them.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, foam panels and stuff can work for the higher frequencies, but as soon as you're getting down to the lower frequencies, I don't usually recommend foam panels. So for your ceiling though, that could be nice because you're just trying to treat that slap echo like we talked about. And that could be really eeasy to hang up.
And the cloud, again, just goes over the mix position. Like in your space, once you get past the mix position on the couch, you don't, it's wide open.
It's wide open,
stuff, so you can get away with that.
Yeah.
If you are mixing music, podcasts, or audio for video, and you want it to sound amazing, then iZotope has got your back. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments. From subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design, iZotope takes your music and podcast productions to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Let's keep jumping forward because the clock moves so damn fast on these podcast interviews. So we've done a reflection-free zone. You talked a little bit about bass traps. Do you want to give some quick tips on bass trap design or what you learned about? Did you build yours or did you buy them?
I bought these.
And where do they go in a studio?
Yeah, they go in all your corners. In a typical room, you'll usually have 4 corners, but you could have more. So anywhere there is a corner, usually they're 90 degrees, but if you have splayed walls, it'll be different.
And it can be ceiling and to wall. That's a corner as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you could put in most designs, the main corners we're going to treat first are the 4 corners in your room. So the 2 front corners and the 2 back corners. And a bass trap doesn't have to be complicated. It can really be, you need at least 4 inches of insulation. And the insulation I always recommend is the Corning 703 or NOF insulation has a really good absorption coefficient, which is a fancy term for it. Absorbs sound across the entire frequency spectrum to the level we want in a recording studio. And you can get that, and it's a little more eco-friendly than the Corning 703, which is like traditional fiberglass insulation. And you can just build a frame around that insulation, and you want to keep a little bit of an air gap. With bass traps, the best way to do it is you build a rectangular frame around that insulation. Remember, it's 4 inches, 2 of those 2-inch panels put together. And then the airspace that's going to naturally happen with a rectangle going into the corner is part of the bass trap. So it works really well. And you just want to try to have it go from floor all the way to the ceiling.
So let me say that again. So when we think about these 2x4 panels or whatever size we're using, we're like, how do you stick in the corner? Is it like go on this wall or just go on that wall? And really the answer is it goes across the corner a little bit. So there is that natural air gap behind it into the corner. And one way to think about panel treatment, I think, is that they say it's like it decelerates the sound pressure traveling through it. So there can be air behind it because it's decelerating that sound wave traveling all the way to the corner and then back out, back through it again.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And they also say that when you have panels where the absorption stuff is set away from the wall a little bit, I don't know how these ones are, if they go pretty much right up to the wall, but if they're out from the wall, that also slightly lowers the frequency response of what it's absorbing. So in other words, if you have something that's 1 or 2 inches thick and it's right against the wall, it gets a certain amount of frequency. But if it's set out from the wall by another inch or something, it's like you gain an extra wavelength of frequency.
Yes. And these panels, they look like they're sitting against the wall, but if I were to pull them back, you would see there's actually an airspace behind there.
Yeah.
So you can make them look really clean by having your frame go to the wall, but then the airspace behind the insulation is what you really want, like Liz was talking about. I've even seen people use like wine cork bottles to like push the panels out.
Nice to hang it out.
Yeah, to hang it out. So that's a little DIY trick if you're interested in that. But yeah, for the bass traps, same thing. You could technically use, and this is a little trick I got from GIK Acoustics, is that in small bedrooms, bass is such a problem because it's a small room. So using bass traps even on your sidewalls is not a bad idea. So So usually sidewall traps can have a 2-inch thick fiberglass panel, but still using that 4-inch bass trap, technically thickness, even on your sidewalls for all your panels in a smaller room will probably make it sound better.
I'm going to say that in my experience, what I've learned for control rooms is, dude, you don't have enough sound treatment yet.
Yeah.
That's basically it. It's like whatever I thought I was good, I needed more, because by the time now I've got what I feel like is perfect, but it's much more than I started with. And it just involved things like, continuing more panels along the walls. Well, it was more bass corner trapping, but it was also the ceiling treatment made a huge difference, and the back wall, a lot of insulation on the back wall.
Yeah. I think my back wall could be even better for sure. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think we'll keep saying this throughout this whole episode is like, it's such a journey. And because all this stuff is pretty expensive, like I don't really anticipate totally overhauling my studio anytime soon. One, because I'm getting great sounding mixes.
That's the key.
And I'm
that's
like, my music sounds great. So
that's how you measure it, right? That's how you know when you've got it, is if your mix translates great, you're done.
Yeah. If you're happy with the music you're creating, like you're good. But then there's this aspect of maybe you want to just keep working towards perfection. And there's something to be said about that. But yeah, like I think a lot of you guys, if you do what we're talking about with these basic things like the bass traps, the reflection free zone, and the diffusion on the back wall, like you're going to be light years ahead of most home producers.
So let me point this out too. As you, quote, deaden your control room, which is essentially we're starting out with an echoey box and we're making it deader and deader until we've got the right balance. When it's too live in your control room, you might find yourself not using enough effects in a mix because the room itself is adding reverb to your, a dry mix might sound like it's got enough reverb on it. And then later like, oh, I didn't use enough. If it's too dead, you can have the reverse.
Yeah.
You can actually put too much reverb on something.
Definitely.
Because it seems to work that way. So room treatments, in the same way that your speakers and the way a mix translates is ultimately all about you're trying to design a one-size-fits-all sound that will play back everywhere as the best average across, everything from an iPhone speaker to a big, movie theater soundtrack when your mix finally makes it into the movie theater rock stars.
Yeah.
Same thing with sound treatment. You're trying to get your control room to be this balance that is going to translate the best to all these other mediums too, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the secret weapon I have in my studio is something called SonarWorks, which some of you guys may have heard of. Yeah. Which is room correction software. And I personally really like it. I've been using it for several years now, and I think it's kind of the icing on the cake when it comes to our home studios, which even when you put thousands of dollars into your acoustic treatment, it's still hard to, like Liz said, get those bass frequencies just right. And SonarWorks does really help sort of smooth out your frequency response on your monitors, meaning just making your monitors as flat as possible, which means that, like we said at the beginning, you're getting the most accurate sound out of your monitors, the pure sound, as I'm saying right now, so that your mixes do translate. And that's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, it helps compensate for all those peaks and valleys of the bass stuff. Yeah. I think it does some other trickery with phase alignment of the speakers.
It does,
too.
With your listening spot and things
because
like that.
One of the challenges is when you're mixing on stereo speakers, it's like you want to trust things. I remember living in such a state of doubt about
totally.
Am I every time I pan something left and right and I listen to the mix later, I'm like, why do the BVs always sound louder on the left? And then I'm doubting my speakers back in the studio. And
it's
that
insanity.
Stuff just drive you nuts. So, SonarWorks can help give you, kind of a set it and, set and forget it, or try shooting it out a few times. Yeah. One cool thing is every time you shoot out your speakers and arrive at what do they call it? Like a configuration. You can save those. Yes. So you can always recall, what, I really liked the way I had it last time. Yeah. And you could move your mix position slightly. You could move your speakers around. Once you move your speakers around, a configuration,
you kind of have to do it again.
To shoot it again. Yeah. But it also works for headphones too.
It does.
And the cool thing is, you shoot it out and then you listen with that on there with the SonarWorks reference 4. I think that's where we're at right now on there.
Reference 5 now.
Is it reference 5?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay. And when you listen to this, the number won't matter. It'll be whatever it is now.
Yeah.
But you listen with that processing on its way to your speakers finally, and it gives you this experience of getting a better sense of like how the low end is and how the high end is, and the stereo imaging and everything.
Yeah.
So it just helps you with your translation. It also makes it so you have to work harder.
Right.
In a good way.
In a good way. It sounds boring.
You want to work towards, you're like, okay, now I hear the way it's translating. Now I can address these things in my mix to try and deal with all the sounds and get it to sound great.
And recording too, I'll throw it on sometimes when I'm tracking as a producer and just try to hear how things are sitting in the mix.
Nice.
So, are
you talking about sort of internal keyboard sounds and things like that too?
Yeah, just the whole mix. Like as I'm producing, being a producer mixer, like sort of this modern quote unquote producer, where I do a lot of the instruments and I play a lot of the sounds. I'm also mixing as I go a little bit. I'm kind of trying to sit things. I'm trying to hear the final product even as I'm building it. And so I'll use SonarWorks to kind of be like, am I hearing the bass right? Am I hearing this the way I really think it is? And I will say for all you rock stars, like,
is Starbucks still hiring?
Yeah, right. I will say the headphones thing is like kind of a game changer, because then you can get a really accurate, like we said before, like if you're in an untreated room with not great monitor speakers, your headphones with SonarWorks on is like a pretty flat reference, and you can really get a lot closer to that perfection that you're looking for.
Yeah, the headphone thing is great. And the key takeaway of Rockstars is just remembering that whether it's your headphones or your speaker, you still have to mentally train yourself for those. So, and that includes just listening to other people's records.
Yeah,
which
definitely.
is that's not a bad problem to have.
No, not a bad problem. It's a perk of the job.
Okay, so let's now we thank you, Rockstars, for your patience. Let's talk about the soundproofing aspect of this stuff. Let's cover that ground as fast as we can.
I know we kind of
the treatment stuff is important because that is the first thing we all do, and that's for many of us, that's as far as we go.
Yeah.
But when you're ready to address the soundproofing, it's a totally different discussion. You actually delete everything we just did. You're back to an empty box because now you're building a place probably.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about that. I have questions written down here, so I'll just jump to them. Should we build from the ground up or use a prefab studio? Or actually, even before we get to that, if we already have an existing space, what are some thoughts about soundproofing? What have you learned? Are there some things that we can do to a pre-existing space?
Definitely.
You had a great design for a garage build too. Although that's not technically it's not exactly pre-existing because you're going to build the studio in there. But
yeah. So I think if you can find a house or you're in a house that you own that has, like I said, a basement with a concrete slab, or it has, and if it's unfinished, even better, and a garage, again, if it's unfinished, even better, with and I keep coming back to the concrete slab because, concrete, I've learned, is very expensive. And so, pouring my slab in my backyard, I think was like $7,000 to $8,000 right off the bat. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, I have a cool basketball court if I decide not to do this. Like a really expensive basketball court in my backyard. So I was like, I'm committed.
The size is a little more like pickleball, I think.
Yeah, right? Pickleball court. Yeah, it was like really expensive pickleball court. So, building in your backyard, I think is awesome because you have a blank canvas. You could build your dream studio. It's going to definitely cost you maybe $10,000 to $20,000 more, I would say. But maybe not, so yes, to answer your question, basement, garage, backyard. Problem spaces are going to be anything on a second story.
Anything that's a room in the house already.
A room in the house already.
Yeah, anything with anything with an adjacent room to it that you're trying to make sure they can't hear you.
Yeah. Adjacent rooms aren't the end of the world. I can definitely teach you how to do that. But like, the floor is hard. Without having a concrete slab, the floor is always going to be a weak point. So if you're building, for example, an apartment, or you're building on the second story of your house, or even I've heard people wanting to build the second story above the garage in one of those finished garages.
Right.
That's like an ideal spot, but you should plop it down onto the first floor where the garage is.
Take the whole damn garage.
Take the whole garage. So yeah, that's kind of the
cars can park themselves now anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, car parks itself, no big deal. So yeah, that's my recommendation. If you had to do like soundproof a bedroom in your house that's not on a slab, it can be done. It's just going to cost more and be harder.
Well, let's address some of the issues there. So if we're in a basement, a reminder, rock stars, if your basement is sub ground level, that's great for you. It's like instant built-in soundproofing.
Really good.
It doesn't get out to your neighbors.
Yeah.
It will get upstairs to the first floor.
Yeah.
But it won't get out to the neighbors. Some other quick thoughts about basement builds are, remember that you're putting your studio, your baby, down there, and you need to know that basement well enough before you do it to know whether it's going to flood.
That's a good point.
And you might not know that until you've lived there for a year, maybe even 2 years.
That's a good point.
So stuff like that. I will say things I've learned is that the flooding in the basement has everything to do with your roof. It doesn't have anything to do with what those fancy people told you needed to build the French drain and all that other bullshit. Mm-hmm. It has everything to do with your roof not having good drainage, not taking the roof water and making it go away from your house.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's an important point that actually I had not really thought about with the basement build, but you're right. Moisture is a bad thing with any sort of construction, so you definitely want to think through that.
And then there's one other thing that you're going to not know, but you might or might not know about now, Rockstars, which is all the plumbing in your house. Typically, a lot of it runs across the basement, right up at the ceiling of the basement, right underneath the floor of the first floor. So whatever you're building is right underneath a whole lot of water that needs to be counted on to have been built right and stuff like that. So these are just things to consider. You know, if that pipe bursts, water just floods your basement studio.
Yes.
Those are things that are less likely to happen on a first or second floor too.
Yeah, those are great points. And things that I hadn't thought about a lot. But yeah, good things to think about, but not at the end of the world at the same time. Just like, Liz said, like, just make sure that you're not going to have issues with flooding, and then make sure the pipes are new enough that you're not going to have a crazy leak.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
All right. So let's move upstairs. Since the basement comes with sort of built-in soundproofing, let's move upstairs to a room in the house. I've got one that I'm doing right now that is my podcast office in my house.
Cool.
And I've decided to we replaced the old windows with vinyl windows, which are a little bit quieter than the old ones, but they don't keep Doobie the barking dog out.
Doobie the dog.
Just a tiny bit more so than before. And so I started looking at, and it's fine. I wasn't approaching this with like, full studio design criteria. But have you discovered some ways to make windows in existing houses more quiet? Like let's say people are just putting up sound treatment in a room, but they're just like, how can we keep the window noise out?
Yeah.
You learn anything?
It's funny. I did a video on that just today, Liz, that'll come out next Monday.
Nice.
So by the time you guys hear this, it'll be out on YouTube. There's two interesting ways that I'll explain first, but the problem with them, I'll give this disclaimer, is that they block the light. So you can, let's say you have an existing window in your studio and you want it to be soundproof, and you want it to be as soundproof as possible while keeping the window without doing any like major construction. You can build an insert that you actually put into the window cavity, either on the front of the window glass or on the inside your room. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Whichever has the most space in your window design, because you're going to need maybe you'll need a couple of inches to do this. And there's two ways to do it. One is that you build like a little wooden frame, if you can imagine this, that will hold 3/4 inch, what is it called?
Plexiglass or something?
No,
acrylic?
Not the plexiglass. This will actually be a particle board. That's the word I was looking for. So 3/4 inch particle board. You're going to use 4 layers of 3/4 inch particle board. And the first 3 layers will go into the actual window cavity. And the very last one will actually overhang the outside of your house or the inside wall of your studio. And then you'll use 4 carriage bolts going through the particle board, and then it attaches to that wood frame. So basically, you're just creating this massive thing that suctions into your window. And you need to make sure that the last piece of particle board has enough, weather stripping, or you could even acoustic caulk it if you wanted to seal it up. Just make sure it's airtight. The two things with soundproofing are mass and airtight air.
Right.
It needs to have a lot of mass, and it needs to be airtight, and it'll be good.
So let me see if I can picture what you just described. So we're talking about this thing. It's like a giant window binky, like for a baby,
Totally,
right?
yeah.
So it's like this huge
window
piece,
binky.
it's a piece of heavy wooden stuff that you pick up and you just insert, and it goes right into the window itself. So that's the block all the light out, block all the sound from coming through. So that's a great solution if you are cool with cutting off the light through the window, but you're like, I just need to be able to play drums in here and not bother the neighbors with the drums going out through the window, that kind of scenario.
The second design, I'll do this quickly because I don't want to, this is already very complex, but you can essentially build the soundproof door in the window. So you could actually build a swinging soundproof door, which usually you would build that using a lot of mass. Again, the more massive, the better. So like I usually recommend a solid core door, and then you can add on sheet lead, and then another layer of 3/4 inch plywood. So 8 pounds per square foot of sheet lead, 3/4 inch plywood, sandwich that sheet lead in between the solid core door, which is what my soundproof door is made of. And this would be a solid core door that fits over your window. And
like on the inside. And
on the inside.
So it's like a really heavy storm window.
Exactly.
Storm
you can
shutter.
Open and close
storm
it.
shutter's on the wrong side of the window.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it could be on the outside or the inside. It doesn't matter as long as you have enough room
I mean, if you're ever wanting to open, you're going to be on the inside.
You probably want it on the inside, yeah.
But you just open this door, and now you've got a window that you want to use. And then when you're ready to record, you just close this door
and make sure it's airtight.
Have you seen any solutions that allow you to still have the light coming through?
Yes. One of the main companies that's doing it is a company called Indo, INDOW. And they have I believe it's plexiglass. And then they have created basically a plexiglass piece with a sort of, like, I want to say rubber siding that like they custom fit to your window opening, and then you push it in and it creates the airtight seal. And the plexiglass, I have never bought their product, but I've just researched it. The problem with plexiglass is it's not very good at actually sound isolating. So this will add a little bit of mass and it'll add that airtight aspect. But in the lower frequencies, like 250 hertz and below,
not going to do much.
Not going to do much, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's probably the same thing you
might
have
help with the
windows.
dog bark from the neighbor.
Might a little bit, but that lower side of the dog bark.
Well, I mean, it's not like he's right in my ear. I still got to make it across the yard.
Yeah.
But that doobie, I'll tell you, he's got a pair of pipes on him.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I made a YouTube video about this as well, and I think there's a few people who've done this. You can buy plexiglass. So buy like the thickest plexiglass you can get, like maybe 1 inch thick.
Yeah.
The most you can afford. It's still somewhat expensive. And then you can get baby bumpers, which are like for the sides of cribs.
Yeah.
And that'll fit around the plexiglass. And then you can slide the plexiglass in with the baby bumper around the side of it. And this is like super DIY way of trying to add some soundproofing to your window.
I love that idea.
Yeah, that's about as like cheapo DIY I can think of.
You're speaking my language right now.
I know, right? I think I'm speaking a lot of people's language.
OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. The OWC Thunderbay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX aptX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. So yeah, the Indo windows, I discovered that just today, actually, when I was getting ready for this.
Cool.
And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But it sounded like the higher end one, might be like $600 a window or something.
Yeah.
So again, not really. I mean, everybody's budget is different, but generally speaking, I wouldn't sweat that. If I had one window and I was like, wow, this is the big secret jam for my studio setup, I'd be fine. But if I've got a couple of different windows and I actually just put in new windows, I'm like, oh man, I feel like
windows are
buy
expensive.
these windows all over again.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of the DIY. I like the, a lot of DIY stuff can be very effective too at times, particularly because DIY lets you custom it until it works for you. So for example, I noticed one of your door tricks was to use the magnetic refrigerator seal.
Yeah.
And that's very clever. It's like, it's hard to have like a pre-made thing that just perfectly fits like that.
Yeah.
But when you build a DIY and you say, okay, this plexiglass, that's the way I can picture what you're talking about, is like you almost build an insert in the window frame that has the metal on it. And then the plexiglass, you just pick it up and it goes, shoop, magnetic seals its way right in there.
Totally.
And close that off. And the importance of that, Rockstars, is the mass is really important for preventing sound from getting through, but also air gaps. You can have one of the hard things to learn about building a studio is you can build this massive wall, but if you're lazy and sloppy about it and you don't acoustically seal every air gap all around the frame of the wooden wall, come on, Lid, you went to architecture school. The joists, not the joists, the
framing.
Yeah, the framing, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
The studs. Thank you.
The studs, yeah.
The studs, a lot of times people build a stud wall like it was just normal. It's like, no, you got to go in there and seal underneath that header board and the footer board and everything, and on the wall corners, because sound will get past that to the drywall, and then you got to you're doing multi-layer drywall. You got to seal in between all those and stagger your seams and stuff like that
with the drywall.
Those are all those details.
Yes, there are a lot of details.
So just do carry that takeaway with you. Whatever it is that you're building, remember that every little air gap between the outside and the inside is going to add up and make a difference. So make sure you're sealing it up really, really well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you got this huge wall, and then the last thing is this little paper thin seal over that big air gap you forgot about, and it's like the sound's going right through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is probably a good place to talk about like my door. Liz came over and I was telling him, I was like, yeah, I built this incredible door. It cost a couple $1,000s in the end to build it. And I've told him that it's actually because it's a solid core wood door on the outside of my studio, it's warped a little bit. And this is a 300-pound door. So the fact that it warped is an issue and it ruined my seal. So I had this beautiful seal, like he said, with the magnetic weather stripping, and I had built 2 seals for the full door. But now we can actually see a tiny little bit of sunlight coming through the bottom part, because as the temperature has shifted over the last 2 years, it's moved. And even these tiny movements with my door has caused some issues with my soundproofing. Now, it's not like the end of the world, but it's something I do want to fix here. There's things that I've learned as I've done this, that even if you do everything right, there's little tiny things that you might be updating and things like that. But you do have to have a lot of detail-oriented work and know the exact specific way of how to do it, so that as you're doing it, you do step by step by step, so that all those air gaps are filled in. And I'll just say, like, for you DIYers too, like, if you understand the basics, which is mass or weight, the more mass, the better. Air, which we've talked about, making sure everything's airtight. And the last thing is transmission. So you need to decouple things. So if there's a material that's touching another material, sound will travel through that material and will potentially go into your studio. So those are the 3 pillars of soundproofing I teach.
So mass is prevents sound from transferring. through
it
almost
absorbs
like,
it. Yeah.
almost like in electricity, like insulation, rubber insulation prevents the electricity from coming through.
Yeah.
But I think the thing to remember when you talk about transmission is certain frequencies, mass will block it out, and other frequencies, it's just like, come on through,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about windows and stuff like that. Same thing with drywalls, all of it.
Yeah.
And so even though something is heavy and blocks a lot of sound, a certain range of frequency, it might be more transparent.
Yeah.
And it has everything to do with the resonance of that particular thing
material
that we're talking about, that material, that piece of drywall or that piece of wood or that piece of glass. Just like your acoustic guitar resonates itself, it's wood, it's blocking some sound from going through, but other sounds it lets right through.
Yeah.
So understanding all that, you mentioned air, and air is also a great sound transmission blocker in terms of air gap between different bits of mass, right?
Yes.
So the air channel, the what do you call it? I forget what I call it. Like when you're designing your studio and you're like, there's going to be a space here that needs to be isolated from a space over there. And if you realize, oh, we also need a closet, or we need a hallway, or we need storage, and they're like, oh, let me put the storage in between these two spaces. Now that becomes a sealed air gap. And that cuts down tremendously on sound transmitting.
Yeah.
From one place to another, right?
Yeah. So like the best soundproof wall you can possibly build, and this is what I did in my studio, is a double wall system.
Yeah.
Where you frame your outside wall. We'll use my studio as an example. So I built it on a concrete slab. I had my outside frame like a normal house. But then I built a secondary wall with a 1-inch air gap from that outside frame. So this is what's known as the double wall system. And this is what helps with the transmission, or what I call them flanking paths as well, but it sounds kind of nerdy. But the idea is that by having two separate walls, sound can't travel through the walls because there's an air gap.
Right.
So that air gap actually creates like a spring where sound gets trapped in between the two walls, and you put some insulation in there, and you have the air gap, and then you have the two layers of drywall on either side. And it traps the sound in there. It's a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, it is incredible, and it's important that I highlight some of the things you're saying. So Rockstars, he said, put some insulation in there. So
yeah, the insulation is a crucial part.
There's a famous, well, I don't know how famous it was. It's famous to me because I remember the stupid story. But there's a test where they take a buzzer. It's a sound buzzer that's really loud, like like that, and it's sitting on a tabletop, and then they put a hard wooden empty box over it, clunk, right over it on the tabletop. And they measure if you can hear the buzzer now, and it cuts down on the sound of the buzzer exiting the box to this, sound measuring microphone on the tabletop. And then they go, okay, now what happens if we put soft absorption on the inside of this box? Like, think about if you've ever looked at the inside of an old speaker box, or even a new one, any speaker box, that's not just a boingy, echoey chamber in there. It's always like stuffed full of insulation. And it keeps the sound from bouncing around in there and slows it down. So if you put the soft stuff on the inside of this box and then put it over the buzzer, it cuts it way down. So that's when I said earlier that insulation and sound absorption does play a role in sound transmission. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
When you build that double wall, or you go from one, outside to inside, if you have that air gap in there between the double walls, don't be afraid to insulate the shit out of it. I mean, I put on my air gaps in my studio with the double wall system, I put insulation on the inside of both of those walls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The insulation thing is something I like to talk about a little bit, because there's a lot of people that say, hey, you really should use rock wool, because rock wool is like the most important, like, oh, it's the best at insulating. But
I didn't use any of it. It's all just regular old house insulation.
You did it right, actually. And I didn't use rock wool either. And the reason is that if you do this double wall system, the insulation doesn't need to be anything special. It just needs to be insulation, because the whole system works together as a full working system. It's not just the insulation. So you'll save a lot of money by not using rock wool and just using the cheapest insulation you can that will still heat and keep your room hot or cold.
Right.
Insulation is there to actually,
well,
for
especially
temperature.
in your studio, we're talking about room walls that actually go from the indoors to the outdoors.
So I had to use a high
actually
R value.
Yeah. What is it, R20 or something? Is that what?
Yeah, we used
that's what I used,
R30, I want to say. But don't quote me on that, because you really want to look at an R value map. And this is kind of more construction oriented, but insulation is for climate control.
Right.
But in soundproofing, the insulation is important for sound, but only the cheapest fiberglass. You don't need expensive stuff.
Yeah. So here's the 2 tips, Rockstars. Normally, when you put insulation in between the studs of a wall framing, the insulation is, pink and nasty as hell on one side, and on the other side, it's paper backed.
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to put the pink stuff in, and the paper faces out, and then I guess maybe you take your staple gun, you staple paper
it on,
to the studs, and it kind of keeps it all together. Except for when we're doing studio construction, you flip that insulation around and do it backwards. What that does is it allows the pink stuff to face the open part of the interior double wall gap, and it makes it so that now the sound is dying into that pink stuff. So it probably still works if you do it either way, but the way I did it in my studio was pink is reversed, but now you have the nasty pink stuff sticking out towards you, and you're like, how do I even keep this stuff in there? And so then I had to discover they make these metal rods that are a teeny bit longer than the spacing between your studs. And you take these guys out. You get a box of them. It looks like you got sparklers. Yeah. Like those metal sparklers.
Gotcha, yeah.
And then you just take each one of those in there, and you just kind of push it into that gap, and it does a little bit of a bendy arc towards the insulation.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
And they're sharp on either end, so they sort of hold themselves in place on the wooden studs. And it's just and it just kind of keeps the insulation in there. And then
that's a good trick.
And there might be some other ways to staple it, in a little bit too. But it's just fascinating. You learn all this stuff and everything. And when you do the double wall thing, which is a great bit of advice, that is the best way to do it. If you can have even more airspace between those walls, all the better.
It is. 1 inch is the minimum.
Yeah.
So I did 1 inch because, floor space is expensive. So if you're eating up floor space between your walls, it's kind of you're like, oh, that was a really expensive air gap.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah, and in mine, we decided, this is actually a clever suggestion by my builder, that we should, hey, what if we put a little doorway here and you could get into that space between these walls? Because I actually had like 2 feet or something. So it's pretty narrow, but you can actually get in there, and it became incredibly not well. I could do a little bit of storage, but it became incredibly handy because what I ended up with was a usable space to run cabling from one room to another or another space.
Yeah.
I'm already going into like multi-room facility
you're going crazy complicated, but just for fun, once you understand the concepts, you can use your creativity to go even beyond that. And that's sort of the fun of this whole project. But like, imagine if you put you created like a closet between two walls, you know, and you,
if you already got to hang a million cables and everything.
You just can't finish off the closet. So it's important that people understand that your insulation inside your closet would have to be open, because the whole way that this double wall system works is that you don't have any drywall on the inside walls. And it's counterintuitive. This is the most important thing to realize, is that this is all physics, and not having drywall on the inside walls is what allows that spring to work.
Yep.
So you could potentially make a closet where you had drywall. It doesn't actually, I don't think it has to be open facing. So you could actually just put the pink stuff in on one wall, pink stuff in on another wall with the paper backing on it, so it's not like getting all over you. And then you could just store stuff in there. And you'd have like a door that you'd have to soundproof again, which is kind of annoying.
Right. But again, it's just that reminder that it's the air gap that's so crucial between the sound from one place to the other. And if you are going to do storage, it's worth considering, instead of building a closet inside my room, what if I make the closet the air gap between the spaces?
I haven't thought about this very much,
also with the doors between, like let's say you've got a door that needs to leave your control room, and the door then needs to go into another part of the recording space or the house even. By putting a big air gap closet space, you could have a simpler version of the door going to the control room and a simpler one going to the other. And you just made that door even more effective, But here's my tip. So, because I just thought of it. Yeah. If you do have the pink stuff facing the wrong direction and you're like, I don't want to get all itchy in there, you could actually just go get like burlap or something like that. You can staple that across all the. In fact, that's what my old dead room was in my drum room. Yeah. And so the burlap is what you see. So it keeps the insulation from getting.
I was going to say, you can't. It has to be. You need to allow air to pass through. Right. So it couldn't be plastic, like I just said.
No, it wouldn't be plastic, but a burlap or a fabric breathable, or something.
Yeah, fabric.
And trust me, they make fabric. If you want to spend a lot of money, it's out there for you.
It is,
but you don't have to.
Guilford
burlap
of
was
Maine.
the cheapest stuff. I think I remember finding, and it gets fun. You're like, ooh, what if the burlap? I mean, burlap is how they did Motown and all those places.
Oh, really cool. It has a cool look. Yeah.
Yeah, and Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals, but the it gets fun because then you're like, ooh, what if I go to the local coffee brewers and I get those old burlap coffee bags, and now I'm like, stapling those up everywhere.
Yeah, that would be really fun. Yeah, I've seen that in studios, and it's a cool design.
So the double wall concept, mass is how you prevent sound transmission through the material. So now let's talk about various forms of mass for building options. So you have things like drywall approaches and what would you, I just call it panel construction, you're like panels of wood or MDF or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You also have cinder block construction, which in your experience, did you find cinder block would be more expensive? Or how does that?
That's a good question. So I built my studio with timber, so wood design. After I built my studio, Henry, my contractor, he went and built a cinder block studio. And I kind of helped a little bit. What I've been doing now that I've been doing this is I help Henry a little bit with the consulting side of soundproofing, and he's the builder. And so with that design, he went ahead and he built the cinder block design. And actually, they didn't do this, but I think this is better, is I would do compressed and as dry sand as you can put into the cinder blocks. So sand is going to be the best. Mortar has a lot of weight, but the problem is that it transmits sound through the cinder blocks more easily.
Right.
So sand is actually like this dampening quality to it, so that the sound will hit the cinder block and it will get absorbed more in the sand itself before passing through. So your best design is to fill your cinder blocks with sand as you go and build a cinder block structure. I think it's a wonderful way to build a studio, and maybe I would have done it. It has the potential of looking a little more industrial. So if you're going for, my studio, it looks nice with the house. It kind of blends. Using hardy board as the outside, but this guy painted his cinder block studio white, It looks nice. You know, it's a really cool design.
So now this also, I haven't done one of these, but it was fun to discover that, you know, after I did my hay bale studio at Bonnaroo for 15 years, that hay bales are actually a really great sound transmission block.
Yeah.
And if you do get into hay bale construction,
it's
actually a great way to build a studio. I mean, it's a very thick wall too.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about hay bale studios. In Nashville, our climate might not be the best for it, but hay bale or
they're incredible. Like as far as keeping cold out or heat out, they're fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. And eco-friendly. And it's just really cool. And then there's also I forget, what are they called? Like, it's not sod. It's like a
Adobe
cob
houses.
Cob houses. Yeah. I've thought, you know, and you can get like rounded edges. I mean, for sound, you could get real crazy. If you wanted to go into these more non-traditional building routes, again, I highly recommend just thinking through the qualities of mass, airtight, and flanking paths. Because if you can understand that, you can build with anything.
Yeah.
As long as you understand the concepts. Now, what I teach and what all the professionals teach is the traditional, like, 2 layers of 5/8 inch drywall. There's something called green glue you can put in the middle of the drywall, which helps with the soundproofing even more. And the reason we teach that is just because it's lab tested.
Does that mean you don't use screws?
No, you use screws still.
Screws and green glue.
Yeah. So
the green glue, I think it just sort of is like a deadener adhesive between. So it's like the vibrations just slow down a little bit as they go through.
It's called a dampening agent. So the sound dampening happens when you have the green glue. And another one is mass loaded vinyl does the same thing. And it basically absorbs some of the actual vibrations in the material itself. So it helps with the soundproofing. It's a little expensive. I did it in my studio. I recommend it. But I think you can still get great results without it. It's just one of those things that helps. I don't think we
used anything in between our walls.
Yeah.
I think we just did, we might have had some green glue. I don't think so. We used a lot of acoustic caulk, though.
Yes, the acoustic caulk is really important.
Those guys were buying it up like
totally.
candy.
Yeah, I know, right?
Out of style. But we did. This is important. So remember, Rockstars, we were talking about different materials have different resonant frequencies. So they're like almost a transparent window at a certain frequency. It's not quite that.
The coincidence effect is what it's called.
So this is where you stagger the widths of your materials. So talk a little bit about that with drywall.
Well, so with drywall, it's not as much of an issue as far as I know. I use 2 layers of 5/8 inch drywall because we're really trying to get the heaviest drywall possible. So, you know, don't buy any of the lightweight stuff. Like, don't buy the 1/2 inch super light drywall. Like, that's great for normal houses because it's easier to hang.
That's good for the kids' room.
It's good for the kids' room. But yeah, for us, we want the heaviest drywall. So the typical double wall system is 2 layers of 5/8 inch drywall, air gap, insulation, another 2 layers of 5/8 inch drywall. And you could do different layers of drywall. The problem with that is you're going to reduce the amount of mass you have.
I think we did do different layers, but it's interesting to hear you say that it's less of a transmission thing. The mass was more valuable than
From everything I learned, it was like 5/8, 2 layers of 5/8 with the green glue in the middle. Now with windows, that is a huge issue with the coincidence effect of windows where glass has a really big acoustic hole depending on its width, and that hole will change in different frequencies depending on the width. So the thicker the glass, the better always. And just a quick note on glass, because I know we're going on and on, but tempered glass and laminate glass are the 2 best types of glass for soundproofing. So you usually have to buy those custom. But what I did in my studio is we have 2 different thicknesses of glass so that the acoustic hole in one glass is not the same frequency as the acoustic hole in the next pane of glass.
Right.
So that means that sound is getting trapped in there.
Right. Well, so it's like when you have different acoustic holes, it's like if 1K gets through one sheet of glass and it's the next one where 2K is the hole.
It's not a problem.
It's blocked off. 2K gets through the other one, hits it. Where 1K is the hole.
It's like, yay. Yeah. And again, with windows, you know, airspace again is your friend. So the bigger the airspace, the better. The thicker the glass, the better. You're seeing the common theme here, right? Like weight, air.
So if you can build your studio in the aquarium, the local aquarium after it shuts down, you're golden.
Yeah.
So you didn't say it out loud, but the implication, Rockstars, is you're not putting in 1 sheet of glass into any of your windows. You need
2.
You need 2 sheet of glass on either. If you're going to see from the inside to the outside, if you're going to see from the control room to the other live room, again, we're probably not building the multi-room, so that part doesn't matter.
Yeah, but if you were, same design.
Yeah, it's like you've got one thickness of glass on the inside of the window, then you got as much air as you can. And remember to put that soft stuff in there if you can. I don't know if you did it.
I did, yeah. There's
see
basically acoustic panels in there. It's really what I would have done it differently, but what I recommend.
That goes for all of us.
That goes for all of us. Yeah. I mean, the windows are phenomenal. I must say, like, as we've been sitting here having this interview, the windows are never the problem. For me, it's always the door. The door is the weak link.
Yeah. They just need a second door.
I do want a second door.
Just put another one
so
on the inside. You'll be good to, you'll be good
bad.
To go.
I know. But the one door works really well for a while. It just has that one little air gap. Anyways, so the windows, the other thing is by putting that same insulation, you can use rock wool, but I highly actually recommend rigid fiberglass like Corning 703 or that Knopf, anything that has a little bit more rigidity to it so that you can actually create like panels of fiberglass around the air gap in your window, if that makes sense.
Make all the inside of the window surfaces soft stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can just put some cloth that you can breathe through over that insulation in your window, make it look really nice. It could be white, it could be black, whatever you want aesthetically. And that's going to help with the sound that's bouncing between the windows. It's also going to get absorbed into the insulation. So that helps with the isolation of the window. So
here's some things I've learned about that too, to watch out for. You're going to build that window and never again are you going to be on the inside of that window.
No.
So you need to make sure that there are not going to be any dead flies in there. I'm pretty sure I got a dead fly in mine.
I've got some dead not animals, but dead things in there for sure.
No dead people.
Dead people in the walls.
And then the other thing is, especially when sunlight is reaching its way to these places, the UV will change the color of things. So I think I have brown burlap that we were using at the time. And now I can see how it's like discoloration of where the sunlight hits it and stuff like that. So something to think about, rock stars. If you have the option to use something that like will last forever in the sunlight, great, go for it. If you, maybe you don't, don't not get sleep at night worrying about getting everything perfect. Trust me, just get it so that it works. You're going to make rock and roll.
Yeah.
The fancier your studio is, if you're anything like me, the first thing you're going to do is make it messy again with a bunch of cool gear.
Totally, right.
None of those little details will bother you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
Okay. So let's see. What else do we want to talk about? Give us a quick, I mean, we're going long on this, so I don't know if that's all right with you, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
What do you want to say about HVAC, climate control in your studio? What lessons have you learned that are important for us? I mean, I see you have a mini split on the wall. That's what I have in my studio. So I decided to build the rooms to be soundproof and sealed off first. And then I learned it's like, oh, you just put a teeny hole through the wall and then there's your HVAC unit. Yeah. Good to go, So there's that option. What have you learned? And can you give advice on if somebody's like, I want a traditional air conditioning kind of situation?
Yeah, I would recommend the mini split first over traditional air conditioning. There's two things you need to think about with your HVAC, and HVAC does technically stand for, ventilation and AC, air conditioning, heating. So there's the aspect of ventilating, bringing fresh air into your studio, and the aspect of actually heating and cooling it. And that's important to realize because we're building an airtight room where a mini split does not usually bring in it doesn't bring in fresh air, actually, I should say, because I don't know any that do.
No, I don't think it does. I don't know if they make one that does.
I don't think so, not that I've found. And if they do, I would love to hear about it. But that means you have to have a separate system for ventilation, meaning fresh air exchange, which makes things complicated. This is where most people are like, oh my God, this is not worth it. But the mini split's awesome because if you get the Mr. Cool mini split, which I did, you can install it yourself. You don't need a specialist to help you out with that. But if you're going to build a traditional system in your home, let's say you're building in your basement and you want to tie it into your actual unit, again, you want to make sure that there's some sort of fresh air exchange in your house system as well. So that may mean incorporating something like an energy recovery ventilator or a heat recovery ventilator, which actually pulls in fresh air from the outside. It can actually heat it or cool it using this cool technology that it's hard to explain, but it has a enthalpic core, I think is the word for it. But that'll help. The ERV will help with like moisture exchange and heat loss with the cold air in the winters and the warm air in the summers coming into your room. And then that would mix with your heating and cooling system in your house, bringing in fresh air plus heating and cooling. So it's all very crazy, but that's how you have one duct providing both hot and cold air plus fresh air into your studio.
Let's point out why this matters, why we're like, well, I never needed that before.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of thoughts of that. One is, Rockstars, you've never had a room that was airtight sealed before.
Yes, that's right.
Studio construction creates spaces that are preferably completely sealed shut.
Yeah.
Which we're not, most houses have leaky windows and doors and everything. And
old houses.
Doors are, and they're opening and closing all the time and all that kind of stuff. So you never even think about fresh air getting in and out, Or there's even like like bathroom vents going and things like that. So there's always natural air exchange in most homes and stuff.
And in
like
new
that.
homes, they put in ERVs because they're so airtight.
Right.
So even in modern home design, it's actually better to have an airtight room. So this is something that's actually happening in modern homes. If you have like a brand new home, you may have one of these systems already. But traditional homes, no, you never worried about this.
Yeah. And when you're in a control room, you're sitting at this, typically, the end that is furthest from the door in the control room by that small wall, sitting there breathing air all day long. And maybe you've got other people in there too, and everybody's breathing. And, I'm not much of a germaphobe or anything. So it's not so much that for me, but the simple concept of like, if we were all trapped in a submarine and we ran out of oxygen, eventually you're like, I'm feeling sleepy,
Yeah.
And I have found myself on long sessions, at that control room, speaker end of the control room, feeling pretty tired and sleepy after long sessions. And not only that, I was also like leaning over that MCI board, which was just like an oven,
Yeah, right.
And it was like
hot and
it was very intense,
sleepy.
So, in my case, I'm lucky because the door like yours opens to the outside. So you get fresh air in pretty easily.
Yeah.
But it's something to think about it when you're designing your studio, whether that's going to be something that you need to consider.
Yeah. And my studio has a ventilation system behind the speakers over there, which is not where I would have put it if I had done this correctly the first time. But I actually built the studio without ventilation, thinking that I could just open and close the door. And I learned pretty quickly within the first year of not having ventilation that that's not really true. That works if there's a huge temperature differential between the inside your room and outside, so the air will actually transition either in or out, depending on which room's hotter or colder. But I actually, being the nerd that I am, I bought a CO2 meter off of Amazon, and I actually still have it in here. And so the big issue is not a lack of oxygen, I've found out in my research. It's a lack of or too much CO2.
Right, a buildup of CO2.
A buildup of CO2 is much more likely than for you to actually run out of it. You wouldn't run out of oxygen in a normal sized room. It just wouldn't happen. You would leave the room and go to the bathroom first. CO2, on the other hand, over like an 8-hour session, the CO2 levels can get to not like lethal by any means, but just levels where you feel them. Like you said, feeling groggy is a typical symptom of CO2 levels being too high, lethargy, headaches, all these things that you're like, nah, I don't really want those, And so that kind of got to me after a while. I was like, I'm going to put in this stinking ventilation system, especially because I teach it. I wanted to teach other people how to do it. And so that's like a whole other part of it. But I recommend that everyone does it. If you're going to build a soundproof studio, I recommend that you have fresh air just because it's healthier. And I wouldn't be a good teacher if I would do it.
If I had thought about it and was starting over, I think I would.
You won't die, Liz. Like everyone's fine. If you don't do it, you won't die. It's more like it just feels a little
You'll
stuffy.
just make more hit records, Roxanne.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
I remember Chris James telling me once that he was talking about some studios where they actually like pump oxygen into the control room.
Totally. And everyone's like
Vegas,
I feel good. That's ridiculous.
That sounds kind of cool too.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, so we've been going a long stretch here. So I have a ton of questions, but rather than hit them all, Rockstars, I'm going to encourage you to go follow Wilson over at soundproofyourstudio.com, learn things about like the set my ratio calculator, and
Oh, yeah.
finding golden ratios for your room build, determining exactly what size you want to do. You're going to learn things like, what considerations do you need to know about running audio cabling, electric cabling, plumbing in your studio, all that kind of stuff. And, the things that are hidden from sight. When we walk into a great studio, we're like, it's just so cool looking.
Yeah.
You don't see all this stuff that's out of sight, out of mind. But believe me, it will be very much on your mind later when you're trying to, run your cable from point A to point B. And you're like, How the hell do I do this? Looks like a mess again. What other things are some stuff that the rock stars will learn when they come to your site?
I know. And Liz and I, we had a really ambitious goal of talking about everything related to soundproofing, but that's why I have a whole YouTube channel devoted to it. But basically, it's like everything you want to know about how to build the walls, how to build the ceiling, which HVAC system is best, how to build your ventilation system, how to build soundproof windows, how to build a soundproof door, anything related to soundproofing. My goal is to cover it on that channel and teach you as much as I know. And if I don't know it, I'll ask somebody or learn about it. So I'm constantly learning, and I've built the Soundproof Studio, and now I just want to help other people do the same thing.
It's great. And Rockstar's a reminder, you can certainly dig around the internet looking for bits of this, bits of that, but it's really nice when you can find somebody who can answer questions for you, when you can find a community and a place to go to get real practical solutions for things. Because again, the science will suck you in like a black hole, and it's fascinating,
yes.
But it can leave you just feeling, sometimes more stressed out than when you started as far as whether you're doing it right or not. And so, even hearing our conversation, you hear how you did it that way. Well, I did it this way, but both of us have working studios.
Yeah.
So knowing that you can learn from somebody and go talk to people about it and just get that feedback is well worth the investment before you dive in and make what's probably one of the biggest investments you're going to make, over the next 10 to 20 years. That will compound on itself as time goes,
Yeah.
They say about building your studio, it's like, you probably want to get it right at the start, because if you don't, you're probably just going to live with it that way for an awfully long time. Once you start making a record, you talk to anybody you meet out there, and they're going to be like, I don't know, man, we just kept making records. I never had time to go. I've got unfinished closet spaces upstairs in the studio that turned into, it's like, oh, wait, that's more useful for storing boxes,
Right,
so we never bothered building. It's going to be amp closets.
Yeah,
there's even pre-run electric boxes up there that we never even bothered finishing and hooking up. I was like,
you're like, we're making music. Yeah. I'm the same way. I'm like, we could always improve, but let's make music.
Awesome. Well, where should the rock stars go to learn more about you? They catch your YouTube channel. You got the website. Anything on social media, and if they're what do you want them to do if they're ready to build their studio or start thinking about it today?
Yeah, I'd say the number one place that you all should start with is just go to soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop and jump into that soundproofing workshop, and that'll give you everything you need to know in order, so you don't have to sift around the whole internet. And I've kind of gone over a whole design with you, so that you can go through your own studio design. And that's kind of where I would start out with. So that's soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging with us, dude. Rockstars, thank you for listening. And Wilson, should we pick up some guitars, make some music?
Yeah, we should. All right. We're done talking about soundproofing.
Awesome. Good to see you, dude. Thanks for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Lewitt, Adam Audio, Isotope, and Spectra 1964. And remember, at iZotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcasts and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.